Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. I would like to start by introducing the distinguished guests on the panel. We have with us Janet Heckman, who is the Managing Director for Southern and Eastern Mediterranean region for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. We have Atle Idland, the General Manager and Managing Director of Desert Control Middle East, and one of the promising startups. We have Rita Schwarzeluehr-Sutter, the Parliamentary State Secretary for the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature, Conservation, Building and Nuclear Safety from Germany. And we have His Excellency Thani Ahmed Zeyoudi, the Minister of Climate Change and the Environment for the United Arab Emirates. Maybe if we can, before starting, show the video that we have. So I would like to kickstart the conversation with you on the human impact of where our planet is going. It's estimated that by 2050, we will have 200 million climate refugees. But there's much more humanitarian impact and human impact. Maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Thank you very much. I think really on the human dimension, certainly in this region, if we look at any of the large cities that we all live in, we see the impact in terms of health. I personally live in Cairo, a city of 22 million people, where some months in the winter you feel like you've smoked a dozen cigarettes, although you've never smoked in your life. So you have huge impact in terms of health, sanitation, water shortages, et cetera. So the impact on daily life is immense throughout every major urban city.
You allow me to jump in?
Of course.
When it comes to the impact of climate change to the humanitarian aspects, we've been seeing a lot of natural disaster events happening in the last few years, and very aggressive and very strong impact on the various societies and countries. An excellent model which can explain that is what happened in some of the Caribbean 2 years ago when it hits the Antigua and Barbuda's country or island, which forced a whole people in one of the islands to move to the other capital for a very long period. And what we're seeing lately as well, as when the cyclone Idai hit Mozambique, and the way that some of the diseases which was not there in the last few years came back, as the malaria was announced that it came back to the country. So those are simple examples which shows that the impact of the climate change and natural disasters on the on the humanitarian is going to be huge, and the number, based on some studies, even can reach to 250 million in a few years from now. So if we don't really do the proper planning from now and do the right infrastructure, which is going to be more resilience to such environmental disasters, the consequences and the bill is going to be too high in those governments and even in the humanitarian organization.
I think the climate change is the most challenge we have. It's not only that we have refugees, but we have also water and food scarcity before they migrate. And you mentioned the small island developing states. They are the most effective, but also in industrialized cities and countries, we are also affected. And I think it's not a question about the north and the south. We have a global challenge, and we have to act also international and multilateral.
Yes. We work with deserts, and we work with greening deserts, and 40% of the land surface is currently drylands and deserts, and it's affecting about 2 billion people in these areas. So, and it's all about the sustainability, the water shortages, and the agriculture and the food security. So all these aspects, we are trying to make some impact on that, but there are so many people who are forced to migrate because their livelihoods are destroyed by deserts expanding and also the water shortage of this world.
Yeah. So yesterday, the Secretary General of the United Nations in his plenary speech was mentioning that this is a global issue and that we can no longer look at it where one country pays for the actions or the inaction, actually in this case, of other countries. So my question is, what are the new structures from a political point of view and from an institutional point of view that would allow us to act both locally and internationally? I mean, this is no longer something that one country can address on its own.
We have two agreements. We have the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, and we have also the Paris Agreement. But the Secretary General said also yesterday, we have to act now. We have these agreements, but now we have to implement the measures and the right measures, because if there are some investments, you have to do the right in resilient infrastructure, in technologies which mitigate greenhouse gases. So now we have to act, not to talk.
If you allow me to add here, I was one of the people who drafted the concept note for the SDGs in 2019, and then we participated with the colleagues from the French government in the final agreement that came out, which is known as Paris Agreement on Climate Change. And from there until now, we're just waiting someone from the leaders to say that he's in denial or he's against the agreements, and we start pointing toward that guy that he's going to ruin the implementation of those agreements. And we shouldn't be the case. We should work and start the implementations. If we're going to continue the talks, nothing will happen. In the field of the climate change and environment, we need leaders, we need executors, we need someone who leads by example. So whenever the communities, the publics, the private sector, whenever they see someone who's really there and implement the whatever he believes in, naturally they will just follow. And this is what we want from the whole world. We know that when it comes to climate change, there's two groups who are believing in it and some others who don't believe in it. And we'll keep this to the science to decide. For us as governments, for sure we want to ensure that the air that we breathe and our people breathe is healthy. The water that we supply to the community and to the public is going to be safe. And the soil and the food that we provide has the highest standard of healthy as possible. So this responsibility is we should not wait someone else to come and tell us that he believes in it or not. No, it's a responsibility that we have to do it, and we have to start the implementation. Otherwise, we'll continue. We'll meet again in 2020 for Paris Agreement and 2030, and we're going to stick at the same place. We have to roll our sleeves and start actioning the work that we're supposed to do.
It's really great to hear such a passionate plea for action. So I represent the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in the Middle East, North Africa. And we've actually put as our chief goal that 40% of our projects be green economic transition by 2020. Last year, actually, we were higher than the 40%. I'm pleased to say that in my region, the Middle East, North Africa, over 60% of our projects had green economic transition background. We've signed over 30 billion euros in green investments and financed over 1,600 green projects and accomplished about 100 million tons of carbon emissions reduction annually. For us, it's a whole combination of ways to do this. So it combines energy efficiency, solar and renewable projects, and waste management, water treatment, et cetera. But what we've shown, because we're primarily a private sector focused institution, is that with the right combination of policy dialogue and project development, these types of projects can be attractive to the private sector. So we've really seen this as the best way to move forward. And if I just use one very striking example, it's the Benban solar plant, which is in southern Egypt near Aswan. It's actually Africa's largest solar project and possibly the world's right now. It brought together over 30 private sector developers, many of whom had never invested in Egypt before. But what was the basis that allowed this? It was policy dialogue between the government of Egypt and the international financial institutions and the major developers as to what was necessary to attract private investment. So putting together an effective PPA scheme. And I'm really pleased to say that it's been less than 18 months. Already 5 of the sites have been commissioned, and by year end, the total site will be commissioned, and it will actually be used also to export electricity to Sudan. So it's an example that if you have the right policy dialogue, and now in the latest tender in Egypt, the cost was less than 2.04 cents a megawatt. So, really attracted to the private sector, inexpensive for the governments involved, no need for government guarantees, but, with the right action, you can, the best way is to increase private sector activity in the area of climate change.
Which brings me to my question of how can we actually look at this not from a cost perspective, but from an economic opportunity point of view. So how can we build the business case for it? So the regulations are on one side, but there needs to be a very clear return on investment for it to become an attractive investment opportunity for the private sector. And maybe I'll start with you as a startup that actually saw the opportunity here.
Yeah, we did. We saw the opportunity of converting, an untapped resource 10 years ago. And the resource is dry lands and deserts. Yeah, they are 40% of the world's surface, and they're untouched. They're not being used. So we have invented and patented a solution that is kind of a soil enhancer, keeping the water, and we're doing agriculture in the deserts now, using 52% less water and having the same or more crop yields. That be carrots, cauliflower, any crops. We also do forest projects in the deserts, and we also treat existing greenery, all about water savings. So there is a financial model, there is a solution, and the ROIs are good. The ROIs are good. So it all comes down to private sector engagement and also governmental engagements. Do they want to be early adopters, or do they want to be laggards? So that's where we are currently.
We need the right targets, we need the right regulations, but we have, as the government, also have to give incentives, because for the first few, perhaps for the investor, it's not so a very, very good investment with a high return on investment. But with incentives, you can push the business model. And we see this with our German Energiewende. We build up the renewables. And the electricity sector, we have nearly 40% of renewables. So, and I think with UAE and Germany as host for IRENA, we tried to implement that the renewables are cheap and becoming always cheaper, and they are competitive. So we can use this in all the countries, also the small development islands and other countries where you can't build up a big grid. So you can put this renewables also decentralized. That's an opportunity, especially for developing countries, but also for industrialized countries, because we show that we create jobs. We have a low rate of unemployment. We are competitive. So I think that's one point, and the other is energy efficiency, especially in the buildings, and there's a big potential. And if we want to be carbon neutral, greenhouse gas neutral to the middle of this century, we need energy efficiencies and also new technologies and renewable energies.
I will give a couple of examples on this case. Some of them are climate mitigation projects, and some are direct environmental projects. When it comes to climate mitigations, I'll speak about the renewables, as Her Excellency Rita talked. 15 years ago, when we started the renewable energy project, it was too expensive, and it was costly. It's not even close to the production of the power from the conventional resources. But nowadays, we're competing. It's even sometimes less than the production from natural gases that we have in the country. But are we going to stick there? No. We have a target by 2050 to reach 50% from clean energy to supply our power needs. And this is basically because we know that in three decades from now, the power demand in the country, and with the growth in our economy, there will be high demand of the power. So we know that we're going to fulfill that in very environmental ways. Is that going to stop our investments in the hydrocarbon? No. We're going to continue diversify the energy supply. In case something happens, our economy is going to be stable. Speaking about the environmental projects, let me pick on the water, because it's one of the scarce resources in this region. And some studies say that some cities, if they continue with the same pattern, same consumption pattern, they will be announced as dry cities very soon, a few years from now. I'll give an example on Cape Town. Cape Town last year was about to announce that it's going to be out of water. But they were lucky that they have that water at the end of the season, which saves the nation. Basically because they did not plan it the right way. They did not build any desalination plants, although they know that it's going to face them one day. And it's the same case with so many countries and cities in our region, that we know that it's going to be a challenge, but we don't think out of the box. It's either that we close to the sea and we build desalination, or we stick there and we just pray to the God that the rain is going to come one day, which is absolutely not the right approach, because there are some technologies which is coming out nowadays, like transforming the humidities to water, and the cloud seedings, which we've been doing a lot of research in the country. So there are some business opportunities, even in very challenging sectors like the water. The ecotourism, if you allow me to give another example here, the ecotourism, everyone is looking at the protected area, conservation areas as very consuming and high-cost projects, because we're just not allowing anyone to go there, and just for the sake of protecting the biodiversity over there. But in realities, we can transform this field into more business opportunities, like attracting the tourists from all over the world to come and see the nature and the beauty of our nature in our region. And we can even encourage the private sector to come and operate it in a very sustainable way. And this is what we're doing in the country. We managed to transform. We now identified more than 120 environmental places where we're inviting the private sector to come and open businesses in that sector.
Before I open it for question and answers, if you could give us each your practical recommendations that you think organizations, governments, companies, and even individuals could take.
Sure. From my side, I think it's very important to have consistent dialogue in order to make conditions attractive to investors. That's one area. Second is to ensure funding is available for viable projects. So we were speaking earlier, and two of the interesting mechanisms that we put in place are green bonds. So we did in Lebanon the first green bonds last year with France Bank, for example, to finance green projects throughout the country. But we also work with the green funds in order to provide blended finance that help make financing opportunities much cheaper for projects which have an energy efficiency or a green or a water efficiency aspect to it. So I think these are really the two key areas. Policy dialogue to make sure the right conditions are in place to attract the investors, and then secondly, the financing availability through blended finance. And I will say, by the way, that Jordan has really been a key example of how to do it right. So it was the success of the feed-in tariffs here in Jordan that enabled it to be replicated in Egypt, and we're now looking at further replication in Tunisia of the effort. And as a matter of fact, many of the same investors, like Norwegian company Scatec, for example, that invested in Jordan went on to invest in Egypt. So really important to lead by examples. And I should also mention that Amman is actually our first green city in the Middle East, North Africa, and we have a great program in conjunction with the municipality of Amman in all aspects of green economy.
Yes, coming from Norway now in the Middle East, we see that adopting new technologies, adopting smart technologies, is really happening in the Middle East, and we are working with deserts, so that's why we're here. But looking to His Excellence in the UAE, the Green Agenda 2030, Vision 2021, Vision 2030 in Saudi, these are serious visions, and they are happening. They're happening. So from us being a startup, having a product, we also want to be part of these initiatives, and hopefully they will drive us, and we will drive them. Yeah.
You're the practical solution.
We are. One of them.
It's the opposite of the governments sometimes. Governments have to give a concrete framework and the right incentives because investors need planning certainly. So in the right technologies and the right green products and infrastructure. And we have to think outside the box. And we need also a diverse economy with SMEs and also with startups. So that I think that would be also UAE is a role model because with their green growth strategy, they can give best influences in these regions, in the MENA region. So I think it's better than someone came from the outside, for example, from Germany, and say how to do this. It's better to have a good partner and a role model in the region.
A local leader. Yeah.
I have two excellent models which we applied in within our sector in the UAE. The first one, we established something we called the Business Majlis, Business Council, where we meet on a quarterly basis with the various stakeholders from private sector. And we discuss what are the challenges, the direction, the policy, and the targets of the country, and what are the best practices that we have in the UAE and outside the UAE, so we can spread it out around the nation. And we managed to do that in the renewable energy, where we connect so many companies to each other. And after that meetings, we start seeing the implementation of so many projects in the private sector. The efficiency is the same, so we linked the right ESCOs together with the interested parties, and we saw that the efficiencies have been increased in so many governmental and private sector buildings. Two flagship projects throughout this Majlis is starting with the hospitality sector, the food waste campaign, and we managed to exceed even the targets that we set for last year. And I'm sure we're going to double the target for this year as well, where we know that the hospitality sector is the one of the most consuming when it comes, or there are a lot of food waste in that sector, so we target that sector directly. Now we're working with the plastic, with the colleagues who's interested in the plastic, the single-use plastic items, and we hope that we're going to announce something in 2 weeks from now, where we're going to lead the topic and the discussion in the country. The other model, which I think it was successful, is the CLICS, the climate change platform, where we as a country, we brought the financial institution and any companies that are interested in financing those startups in the field, and we open it to the schools, universities, and any small entrepreneurs who have any ideas, and we take them through a very compressed training program to ensure that they reach the level of presenting it the right way to the financial institutions. And we managed to reach something around 91 million last year generated to support such projects. Last points which I want to speak about is the data. When it comes to data in the climate change environment, it's very challenging, and most of the way that we're running the business is very conventional. We just send people to take the data. We haven't, unfortunately, globally, we haven't reached the level where we're capitalizing on the latest technologies, the right drones, to move on in our sector like the other sectors. In the UAE, we started that, and we know that the impact is going to be an excellent in the way that we're reviewing the policy and the strategies of the sector. So in a few months from now, the results from those experience will be ready. We'll be more than happy to share it with anyone from the region, so we can spread out the good work of utilizing those latest technology in the environmental sector.
Thank you. I would like to open it for Q&A. Yes. Do we have microphones?
Good morning, Helmut Fluger. I'm a German-Swiss entrepreneur. And I want to approach something we discussed in Davos this year. And this is the need for a fast-track financing track. Depends not only Green Climate Fund and other institutions, because there's one situation in the last months especially. There is the need that we have to act with the speed of the problem, especially in the Sub-Sahara region. And the problem is growing so enormously fast. I mustn't explain it here. There is on one side solutions like yours, Atle, and others, yeah, and also very good ones in the water sector. There's on the other side now the interest of impact financing in the European sector. And these families who made their billions in Finland, Germany, Switzerland with forestry are ready to invest also in Africa. But we, and also I met President Kenyatta and others, yeah, and then we go and say, okay, there is, let's say, a big share, 4/5 from the private sector, and 1/5 has to come from the country. And this has to be secured by an international financial institution. And this is now the leg where it takes maybe months or years, not months, more years. But the problem is growing faster. So is there, Janet, yeah, that's your home turf, are there efforts? And where could be an anchor? Yeah, we are sitting here with quite influential thinkers always on the forums, yeah? But there must be the creation of a fast track. And the due diligence from the science, this is done. And your country, with the history of Father Sayed, is a very good showcase. But you are a rich country, but most of the countries are poor. We need a fast track. Thank you.
Well, I think that, it's really critical to have a private sector-focused institution who helps to move things quickly. So I think Ben Bon is a great example of how quickly, a process can start and be implemented. And in a country like Egypt in particular, where there's a great doubt about the efficiency of private sector versus state or versus military to implement projects, I think it was a great example because within 15 months, not only were funds dispersed, but the project already up and running and evidence that it can attract key foreign investors, the best specialists. So, what you need is that real combination of private sector investors willing to move quickly and efficient, effective mobilization of subsidized funding for it. And I'd be glad to speak to you afterwards.
One more comments. It's not about being a rich country or a poor country. We know that there are so many rich countries with a lot of huge volume of hydrocarbon resources, but the situation that in those countries are very bad. It's about the leadership, it's about the commitment, and it's about the willingness to do something good for your communities and your people. We saw so many poor countries manage to shift their economies in less than 50 years. So it's not about having the resources or not, it's about the right leadership in those nations.
We also had mentioned, if you could touch on that as well, the short-term versus long-term. So there's some fast track, but also the strategy side. We had that conversation in the back, but I think this is...
We had the quick discussion at the beginning on the definitions of climate change and environment. The climate change has the social and economic aspects, and usually the mitigation has short-term payback periods for any project similar to the renewables, efficiencies, industrial investments when it comes to the green technologies. But the adaptations, it's more long-term, and some of the leaders, they always think about the period that they're going to be managing the organization or managing their country. So they want to harvest as much revenue or positive results so they can continue with the elections. But the case should be long-term investments because they have to think about the future generations and the sustainability of the resources for those generations. When it comes to environments, the environments are always a long-term investments, and any impact that we do nowadays is going to affect even our own children. So it's going to be within the same generation, not even the next generation. And I gave an example, which is the small species in the world, the bugs. If the bugs are gone, it's going to even affect the existence of us as a human being. So we should not undermine any negative impact that we do to the nature and to the resources that we have.
Yeah, just one comment, really. I like your idea with the fast track, and I think you cannot be fast enough right now because water scarcity, food security, forced migration of people, and I'm still talking deserts and drylands around the world, it's terrible. It's terrible. And there are solutions. We are one, as you said, but people need to act, I think, now. Yeah. And our solution, combined with other solutions, we have direct impact of 8 of these 17 UN sustainability goals. So we are kind of an impact entrepreneur as well. But early adopters, laggers, I'm still back to that.
Ibrahim Zabi, Majid Fatim, UAE. First of all, I would like to thank you. I just lost 2 of my questions, so I had to think of a third one because what I can see is, and we work with EBRD, and I'm glad you mentioned an example because what I see here is a new forms of collaboration, a solution. I see environmental entrepreneurship. So the question is, and Your Excellency, you talked about it's time to act and enough denying, and which I think all of us, we agree with you. So how can we communicate the new forms of collaboration, the environmental entrepreneurship, and translate it to the non-usual suspects, so the people outside this room, to make it the common and to make it, you talked about green economy, or let's talk about circular economy now. Let's take it, we're experts here. So how we can translate what we say here as experts to the outside guys, to the presidents, to the ministers, because they have a daily job to do. How we can be in the heart of their decision making, which I think is the way it should be. Any ideas, any suggestions, any projects, any objectives, we can take it from this panel and action it next day or the next year or the next 5 years?
Oh, this is a great question, because I happen to come from a country where the words Paris Agreement are controversial. And I personally am from a state, Ohio, where there's a real push again to generate electricity from coal. So I actually find it personally quite frustrating. But I do think that a lot of times when you put things in economic terms, certainly for the business and for the business community, it helps to make sense. When you talk about energy efficiency and the cost saves, when you talk about the healthcare implementation, healthcare impact and the cost of healthcare, to the governments, to ministers, when population, when voters begin to complain about water prices going up. I mean, even in a country like Ireland, you practically saw riots a year and a half ago when they started to meter and charge for water. So when voters become aware of the issues, that's when really politicians listen and take action.
And I think the awareness is rising because we have the movement Fridays for Future, and the young generation, they know and they feel that we have only one planet, and there is an impact to governments. On the other side, governments have to decide about a long process of transformation. You can't switch from one day to another and say, okay, Germany, we phase out of nuclear power. We want to phase out of coal. And I think if we have to phase out of fossil energy, we have a big challenge, because now we have the revenues by these sectors, and we have to create now a pathway how we can phase out, how we can manage this, how we can create jobs, and at the same time in which technologies we invest with the revenues from the old industries. So we have, we need a little bit of time, but the movement of the people and the voters is urgent, and we have to recognize this, and we are convinced. Environment politicians are convinced naturally, but governments like the US, I think it's a very short time thinking like the government thinks, because there's a tipping point. We have no opportunity to choose, and therefore we have to choose now and not if it's too late.
Yeah. I think I want to pick on one of the comments that Her Excellency Rita mentioned, is the youth movements on Fridays. I really doubt it's going to be continuing having it only on Friday. It will be a movement throughout the week, because the current generation with the social media and their well understanding of the subject when it comes to environment as well as the health is a topic which is going to put more and more pressure on their governments to move on quickly on that. So we as governments should not wait for those movements to come. We should start acting from now and be ready for such movements.
I'll just add that personally, I think what I'm most proud of is, after my 40 years in commercial and investment banking, is that my 24-year-old daughter is now doing her master's in environmental sustainability. So what you say about the youth is true.
So actually, there was a survey that showed that 45% of millennials would pay more for green products. than regular. So I think also people are voting with their dollars and the way they consume more responsibly. I think we have, one here and then.
My name is Osama Al-Kurdi. I'm from Saudi Arabia, and my daughter too went to school and
Mabruk.
thank you very much. And
Female
studied
movement.
environmental engineering in the United States, to give you some credit. 3 quick points. This session proved me right when I mentioned in another session about the need for a small government. And it seems like Ireland, the solution for whatever the government is thinking of, is to start charging the people, thinking that would be the ultimate solution to, say, the water or, of course, the environment or the municipal wastes. And I'm very sensitive about that. They always think that, this is an opportunity to start charging the people rather than resolve the issue at hand. My second point is, maybe later you can tell us more about the France Bank green bond, because that sounds interesting, translates the interest of the private sector into financial terms. It sounds very interesting. My third and last point is, I sit in gatherings of this nature, and I hear a lot of good ideas, a lot of thoughts, from governments and non-government and non-profit organizations and from the private sector. But I don't know that there is some sort of a formal gathering in which these people can sit together and learn from each other. There is no, even on the regional basis, it can be international, of course, but I wouldn't even think of the complications involved in something like this. But at least on regional basis for these organizations and non-profit organizations and governments to sit down and chat, come up with ideas and see how we can learn from each other. And I'm not aware that there is something of this nature. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not really.
Anyone would like to comment?
Yeah, I'll pick on the third point, which is the formal gathering. We, in whatever I mentioned in my interventions, are real projects which are happening right away in the country. So we'll be more than happy to host any one of the colleagues here and anyone from the region to come and see those projects. But also we have two main gatherings in the related to the sustainability. One is called Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, which is usually we host in the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, which is we usually host in the second or the third week of January on an annual basis. And the second event is the World Government Summit, which is we host in the second week of February on an annual basis, which we tackle all aspects of the governments. So even your first comments regarding the small governments can be discussed there, and you'll see the model that we're talking about, and we're talking about the future governments in the region and around the world.
There is a question.
Hello, I'm Mohammed Mutawakil, a global shaper from Casablanca Hub, from Morocco. I'd like to brief you about some of what I did in the last couple of years. I've been working on a hydroponic system using solar park, electrifying them, and also forestation using a new kind of tree that is called Bologna, which can fertilize the salty soil in the Moroccan area. I'd like just to mention that we are here in the World Economic Forum in the title of building new type of cooperation, new type of cooperation between the Middle East countries. So I've been working with Algeria and Tunisia about implementing such a project, and we made it actually. So I'd like to know how we can, you as a government and the private sector, can promote us as a young leader and change makers to cooperate and bring those solutions to the Middle East countries.
We'd be very happy to work with you. We have a program called Advice for Small Businesses, and this is exactly the type of area that we'd love to be involved in. We're in 3 cities in Morocco, Tangier, Casablanca, and Agadir. And, of course, anything that brings cross-border fertilization of ideas and solutions like to Tunisia and Algeria would be right up our area. Well done.
Global Prosperity Award as well.
from our side as well, we will welcome to have you part of the couple of initiatives that we have. The Arab Startup Initiative, the Clicks Initiative, which we promote the entrepreneurs, as well as the Prosperity Initiative, which is under the name of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. So there are so many means. We'll just get in touch with the teams, and we'll be more than happy to have you on board on those initiatives.
Yeah, and I would be very happy to educate you on our solution and share the insights that we have. I will make sure we do that. Yeah.
Reem, if you don't mind, I just want to comment on the event thing. This is the 4th event I speak at in 1 week. There was one in Abu Dhabi that was organized in cooperation with UN Habitat and the government there. We had 2 events in Kuwait with Majd al-Fatim. One of them was about net zero and this is the 4th. So there's a lot happening in the region, and I think, as His Excellency mentioned, it's formal, totally formal, and it was organized by the governments and in some cases. So the thing is, it's all about leadership, it's about taking initiative, and this, I think, is what's being done in the Emirates as an example. Thank you.
Yes. Excuse me? Yeah, here.
Good morning. My name is Frank van der Steen. I'm with the Lufthansa Group. I'm not speaking on behalf of the airline industry now, but more as a concerned citizen and businessman. We haven't really mentioned a lot about the impact of climate change on migration. You mentioned it briefly in the introduction, and obviously all projects and measures have an impact on climate change, and therefore will also have hopefully an impact on migration. Maybe my question to you, Mr. Idland, if I look at Africa, Africa currently has about 1.2 billion inhabitants. By the end of this century, that will be 4 billion. Obviously, projects like yours are really essential in order to mitigate possible migration flows. Do you have any calculation in terms of what kind of an impact your project can have potentially in terms of employment, in terms of feeding people?
Yes, we have some calculations, and we have, I would say, more a vision for our company and a social impact value proposition, if I can use that word, because we treat desert sands and drylands and make them, which is ready to be grown. We keep water, yeah, and we save water. So our ambition as a company is to treat 5 million square kilometers of dryland and deserts within 2030, having a direct impact in this region of 100 million people's livelihood. And that goes back to the migration. People can stay, they can grow their food in areas that people are leaving. Yeah.
Anyone else would like to comment? Any more? Yeah, we would like, I mean, I just want to say in terms of also political implications, when the first wave of protests started in Syria, it started with the farmers, from Rif Dimashq, from the farmers around Damascus, because they had witnessed the worst drought in a long time in Syria. And the government had cut the subsidies for the farmers. No one says that Syria started because of climate change, but climate change also played a role in accelerating the political repercussions. So I think that measurement is key in seeing how we can actually work on internal displacements, but the economic impact on the livelihood of people, 100%.
You opened the session with the question, is it cost or business? And I only can answer it's a clear business. Climate change is a business. And when we had these discussions now in Nairobi 2 weeks ago on the United Nations Environmental Assembly, you see solutions, and therefore I mention again, we as family entrepreneurs, we think anyway in generations. And forestation, agroforestry is something for generations. And it's not only to and thank you very much, Annette, for your comment, yeah? It's to organize this properly. This is where we stand as pioneers, yeah? When we got this prize from the Pope last year, we immediately started a 1 billion fund to help 10 countries in Africa. We were invited by the presidents. We spoke to the banks and so on, but then this 10 to 30% commitment by international IFC, etc., yeah, is missing. So it's pending. And your solutions, others, we can implement our rainfall enhancement, our forestry, and all these things within weeks. Yeah, but this has to start. And thank you very much for your comment. I really appreciate that UAE was not known as a scientific center, but now in this area, yeah, you do a very good contribution to also train these people. But your training makes the demand better and bigger, and this gap has to fill now. And it will, when everything went well, yeah, really close now in the next, not months again, but years. And climate change is a good business. We as entrepreneurs, and you are my deputy minister in Germany, yeah, we entrepreneurs had to pay a lot when we closed the nuclear power stations and the coal for our factories, yeah? But we contribute because the output is not only a better world for us and our children, it's changing the whole ecosystem. We go into another world, yeah? Now we contribute more from our solar panels on the factories and our homes, yeah, to the grid than we need. This I never thought 20 years ago, yeah? Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just have one comment on this? I fully agree what you say, and it is a business, and it has to be looked at as a business. But as a business or a new technology or a new product coming into business, you also face threats, and people don't talk about that too much. Are we a threat to the existing businesses? Are we a threat to policies? That's a question that I also feel on my body every day. Are we more a threat than a solution? That's a question for everybody.
Rita, you wanted to comment?
I want to stress that it's not only a question of economy, it's also a question of responsibility and humanity. And when we decided about the 2030 agenda, then we thought that there are 3 pillars: the social, the economic, and the environmental. And these pillars are unique. So I think, yes, we need the business, we need the right technologies, but we also want to have an inclusive society and economy, and we need a nature that also our children and grandchildren can live on this planet. So I think if we focus only on the business, it's too easy. And I want to say there's a special study made by a Swiss bank, Lombard Odier, and they examined if enterprises are more successful if they look in the long-term range and are sustainable. And yes, they are more successful than the others before 2015 and the 2030 agenda. And I think this must be also have an impact that if you decide about where you invest, and you have to decide and look what is with the other stakeholders, not only with your stakeholders in your company, but also the society, because if you look around in the geographic situation, geographic political situation, then we need also intact environment, but also intact societies. We have concentration of capital, and we have a lot of conflicts, and I have the dream that we bring this together with the 2030 agenda, not only with business. We need business and we need good economies, but we have also to look on the civil society and inclusive societies.
Hello, good morning. I'm Krista Pilot with PepsiCo. I thank everyone for a very interesting panel. My question is a little bit about kind of more public-facing campaigns for both, governments as well as non-government actors. I think the hardest thing is changing human behavior, and everyone has to make a different decision, whether you're someone turning off a tap or choosing to recycle, or you're in a corporate job and you're making a decision about an investment for energy reclamation or whatever it might be. Have you seen any examples of good public-facing campaigns that get people not just feeling guilty, but actually knowing how they can act and how they should make different decisions? I'd love to see some examples, please.
At the end, you have to show the customers that they have a benefit. Nobody decide for one product because it's really nice and we talk about it's sustainable. At the end, the consumer have to feel that he have a benefit, and you have to choose between alternatives. My colleague mentioned the energy efficiency and the cost aspects. If you see that you save money, concrete, you save money, then you choose this product. At the end, we talk about, in Germany, recycling and recycling bottles and how we manage this. The consumer takes this one who has a benefit.
There are a couple of excellent models which has been applied. The first one, for sure, whenever you touch the buckets of each one, they will stop doing any bad behavior against the environment. So applying fines against those people will for sure put pressure on changing their behaviors. The second model is having building the new generation with the new mentality. So you will ensure that in 12 years from after the graduation of this generation, they will have a full awareness of the impact of any negative behavior that they do toward the environment. And there are excellent models which has been applied, for example, in Singapore with the gum. They managed to phase it out totally with the long-term plan. And now it's a crime to see someone who's having a gum in Singapore. The third model is having a fan. If a fan or a leader who's going in a campaign, a huge group will follow, and they're going to apply the same behavior again and again because they associate that action with their fan.
We have room for one last question.
All right, I'll take the last one. Thank you very much, everybody. My name is Sam Alamayo. I'm the managing director of Cambridge Industries. We invest in the solid waste management space throughout Africa and the Middle East now. And my question is to Your Excellency, kind of two sectors that are not mentioned very well but contribute significantly to greenhouse emission as well as just environmental devastation is the solid waste sector, solid waste management in general, and the other one is the consumption of meat and the livestock industry. Are there programs that you're implementing to address those two sectors?
The waste is a big issue in our region. I'll be frank with you, but at the same time, it has a huge potential. We as people living in this region, we don't understand the value of the waste. There are so many excellent initiatives or projects under final approvals in the whole region, not only in the UAE. We started a couple of ones in the UAE, and a couple will be announced this year. But we know it's a challenge, but at the same time, there is a huge potential and investments opportunities for the private sector as well as for the communities. Let me just mention a couple of projects. Dubai announced last year one of the largest Middle East waste to energy projects, which is under the final signing papers, and it's going to be implemented in 3 years from now. Sharjah, they almost applied most of the technologies available to deal with any solid waste, and they're going to continue applying any new technologies that they see abroad. We announced one of the RDF projects for the Northern Emirates, and waste to energy is under consideration as well, so we can tackle the whole waste in the Northern Emirates. Abu Dhabi is going to have a huge plan. It's under the final approvals. It's one of the projects was going to be distinguished as waste to biofuel technology. So there is a plan in the UAE, and the construction is going to take some time, at least three to 4 years, so we can reach the targets that even we set for ourselves locally. The meat, it's a topic which we haven't tackled, to be honest with you, because most of the meat that we have is imported from either different continents or from far away. What we know that some of those countries that we import the meat from are tackling the issue, and they're even start controlling the feed that goes to those livestock. So, but are we doing something locally for the meat and for the livestock? For now, to be honest, not yet.
I'll just add on the waste management. It's the number one issue. Certainly in Egypt, it's the number one concern of the environmental ministry. At the heart of our Green Cities program is waste management, waste to energy. We have huge projects in almost every country in the Middle East.
Thank you so much. Please.